Hello, my name is Omar Abasad. April 28, 2018 at 4:06 p.m. So I tweeted a few comments today on ROSHINI 911. Those are my tweets, just to confirm. I drew some parallels between a case that involved a West Indian woman, who had stabbed somebody in a Shoppers Drug Mart store. And there was a big story, ongoing story about it. And there was some very interesting parallels to what was going on with her claims about hearing voices and picking up men all over the place, and hearing rumors about herself, people conspiring. There's a conspiracy conspiring against her. Now, some of these claims I've been talking about in my case of targeting, and it's very evident, very, very evident that I am being targeted because there's an order to remove me from the building. So um, this is what I'm being harassed about outside my window. So um, the amount of times the comments were made, I'm going to make an educated guess and assume that it's true. There is an order to remove. I was pulled in for a mental evaluation. Of course, no mental illness was found. And I'm repeatedly being told that I'm paranoid by the cops and delusions of grandeur as soon as I talk about gang stalking. So there are some parallels to this story. And I drew the parallels to make the point that what's going on with me is not an isolated case in Toronto. It's going on with a whole lot of other people. Now, what's interesting is that this girl, when she started in school, she came here 5 years old from Guyana, I believe. Um, she she was very vulnerable, obviously, and she came from a West Indian background, and an abusive background. So she was vulnerable, and it would seem to me that she was targeted, probably starting at 5 years old, to be trafficked at some point in her life. And when she realized what was going on and she started talking and she probably started asking questions, um, she was set up and and you know got disposed of. She's sitting in a psychiatric hospital, most likely today. Not sure what the status of the case is right now. So there's a lot of parallels here to my story. However, as I pointed out in my tweets, um, I was not abused by my parents, either one of them. Uh, it was exact. It was exactly the opposite in my case. My parents were strict, but I was never beaten up. I knew I was loved and cared for and protected. I was educated. Um, so there was no, I was never rejected by my parents. I was supported by them every step of the way in school. So there's no vulnerability in my case about being rejected and abused by my parents. So this is very crucial in some of these cases where people become mentally ill. So my point was to draw in drawing the parallel was to point out that there is trafficking going on in Toronto in a very covert way. There are trafficking rings that deal in voyeurism. There are trafficking rings that deal with masturbation. There's trafficking rings that deal with sex slavery, prostitution. These are different rings, different parts of the sex slave industry. So um, the uh, the idea that trafficking is always out there. You can always see the signs of trafficking is not true. This person, Rahini Besasar, was trafficked. She was being trafficked. And I believe remotely, I'm suspecting remotely, as I'm suspecting right here in this building, the trafficking is being done remotely. It's interesting to note that, as I said before, my case is not an isolated case. And keeping in mind that this girl came here in this country at 5 years old, and I came when I was a little bit older than that, but in a vulnerable state of mind because new immigrants, not a lot of money, going through the school system and facing the cultural challenges, the differences in the cultural backgrounds of the countries from which you come from, the country from which you come from, and the one you're in, and dealing with uh, um, a certain difference, a certain amount of difference in belief system, value system, and so on, especially where girls are concerned, dating being an issue, and how liberal or versus conservative the parents are. So these things create a lot of problems in the family home, especially if you come from a very conservative background. So people who are in the system, teachers, some teachers, um, counselors in the school system, some of these, as I'm sure you've read in the past, are actually pedophiles. They traffic kids that they choose in the system. And there's a lot of cases in this on this topic. I'm not going to quote any, but it happens very frequently, and it's happening more and more frequently because there's a lot more vulnerable kids in the system, a lot more refugees, people coming in from very poor background, coming into the system, and being preyed on by traffickers in Toronto. So that's why I drew the parallel. Um, Again, the tendency to become violent. I don't believe, my personal opinion, I don't believe that this woman Rohini Besasar was violent to start with. She obviously, if you look at the pictures, some of the pictures that's posted with the articles, she was just the opposite, just the opposite. So something made her do what she did. Maybe the drugs she was on, maybe she was being harassed, criminally harassed by her traffickers to drive her to do this. Or maybe she just got to the point where she lost control at some point um, uh, due to being harassed so much. I personally think it's the effects of the drugs because she was on antipsychotic drugs, which has the effect of making you violent and suicidal. So that's just what I wanted to say. Obviously, you're looking at me talking. There is no mental illness. I come from a different background. I come from a different set of um, people, and people by specifically, I mean my mother. Genetically, we are not bent to be violent. It's just the exact opposite. Um, so I don't believe that violence in any form whatsoever, physical violence, solves any problems. It doesn't solve anything. None, absolutely none whatsoever, other than in self-defense. defending your property and defending your family and your kids, and yourself if you are attacked physically. That's the only condition under which we as human beings should be using violence. Even if you become extremely angry and someone is verbally abusing you, you always have an option to walk away. That is always a choice, unless somebody physically assaults you. And that is always the choice that should be made. Made. There is no other option. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I find different ways of dealing with my stress that is caused by being targeted this way and trafficked. I firmly believe, I very, very firmly believe in, deep down in my soul that nobody, but nobody can make you into a sex slave, can make you into a prostitute, can make you do something that you don't want to do and label you as somebody criminal unless you allow it to happen. If you were to do something because you're cornered and you're intimidated and you do it in a state of fear, that's a form of mind control. And really, you're not responsible for your actions in that state of mind. However, you always have a choice. If you're aware of what's going on, there's always a choice. And I am very much aware of what's going on. So I do have that choice. That's the difference between somebody who is operating in a state of fear and making choices that maybe should not be made, and somebody who is very aware of what's going on, knowing that there's always choices in every situation. So for people who are affected this way, I am talking, exposing this to make people aware, both the people who are affected and who know that they're affected, and people who are affected and don't know and don't realize that they're affected. I want to point out the signs that you can recognize when you are being targeted this way, because sometimes you're targeted and you don't see the signs until sometimes it's too late. So I went through the program, and in retrospect, it was excruciatingly, excruciatingly emotionally, psychologically, and physically painful. However, as everything else, you can either allow it to destroy you or you can allow it to make you stronger. You can make the decision to use the experience to make yourself stronger and to help other people along the way, which is exactly what I'm doing. You always have a choice. Be aware that unless you're physically attacked, you always have the choice of walking away. There is no point in becoming violent about anything. Nothing is worth violence. Absolutely nothing. If you were to slap somebody, all that will happen is they're going to get so angry, they're going to want to slap you back. And it will escalate from there. And there's nothing that will be solved doing that. The real problem, this violence towards women and this targeting and this trafficking of women especially, and men now, boys more and more, it's because there is a systemic bias in the thinking against women. Let's talk about women specifically. This bias has to be dealt with to solve the problem. And this is working within the system to be able to do that. There is no other way. You have to change the system and the mindset of people. It's the only way you're going to get rid of it. This prejudice, this violence towards women. It's systemic. It's a way of thinking. It's a mindset that needs to change. It's the way people look at women, the way they think of women, the way they behave towards women. That needs to change. Physical violence is not the answer. Talk to you another time.